Curiosity's not a sin, Harry, but you should exercise caution.
It's a time strap. You're fraternizing with the enemy.
There's the Cruciatus curse.
And we'll celebrate a boy who was kind and honest and brave and true, right to the very end.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We're doing Chapter 3, The Invitation. And we have Elizabeth back for a third straight episode.
Hello everyone. Sorry if you're sick of me.
We're hoping you like the new intro and break sounds that we have. Once again, I'd like to thank Jen, who's been on the podcast before, for helping us out with our new logo that we have. And Drew and Anna helping us out with the quotes and the production and all that kind of good stuff that goes into those sounds that you hear. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much to all three of you. Thank you for all the work you do on Twitter with helping with all of the Twitter stuff. And
it's my pleasure and enjoyment.
Well, I bring it up because we got 3 Twitter polls to discuss that you put on recently.
I want people's opinions.
And, hey, they're great questions and they're really interesting results. So, with that being said, let's get into some of them. One of the posts was from our first chapter in Goblet of Fire. Who do you think owns the Riddle House? The Riddle House being Chapter 1's title.
Right, because it discussed about how, a strange rich person owns it, but we were like, is it a wizard? Is it Dumbledore?
Yes, they left it very vague in the book, so you thought it was... Actually, we thought it was...
I think we both were like, I think it makes sense for Dumbledore to have it.
It's a rare moment where we agree.
I could see it as a wealthy muggle, but if it's connected to Tom Riddle, come on, it's got to be Dumbledore, right?
Well, the people have spoken.
What did they say?
60% say that it's some wealthy muggle. 30% say it's Dumbledore, and apparently 10% think it's somebody else, anybody else. So
interesting.
Yep.
So we're taking her literally at her word. Some rich person owns the house.
Taking the words in the book quite literally. That's fine. So moving on to Chapter 2, The Scar, I had somewhat of a hot take, I guess you can say.
Very hot take.
I said that The Scar, Chapter 2 is The Scar, is the worst chapter in the entire Harry Potter series.
Which I'll give you that it's pretty bad, but I don't think it's the worst.
Well, 60%. 60% of people that voted on this poll said that it is, quote, as you put it in the answer, so boring. I would tend to agree with those 60%. 40% said no, there are other worse chapters. Mm-hmm. And I just want to shout out Zach over at the Belated Binge podcast, who put forth Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 1, The Worst Birthday, as his worst chapter.
And honestly, I agree. I think that's the worst just because there's just so much recap. And you're like, oh, I know all of this. I literally just finished the book.
So here's where I both agree and disagree with that. As I tend to do on episodes that you are no, but this time I'm agreeing and disagreeing, I guess, with both you and Zach on this. That, yes, it is a chapter that has many of the same flaws that I point out in the Scar chapter. Mm-hmm. As you just said, the redundancies are massive. You're literally just getting told about the book that you just finished.
I get why she does it. It's just like, ugh, come on, let's get on with it.
Here's the difference between the two, and why Goblet of Fire's chapter sets it apart from the Chamber of Secrets chapter. Chamber of Secrets is book 2. Goblet of Fire is book 4. I understand, and I'll tip of the cap to her doing a recap chapter in the second book.
Yeah.
I do not need to know Harry is special in book 4. I got it. Thank you very much. But anyway, I digress. But that's my only... I totally get it. As far as content goes, yes, they're very, very similar.
Yeah.
But my thing is just book 2 to book 4.
I guess book 2 also kind of has the whole, hey, here's Dobby, and your friends aren't writing to you. Was it all a dream? There's, some substance to
also,
it. It's just, Every time I read it, I hear like the Monty Python, like, get on with it, like just in my brain.
This was chapter 1 of book 2 as well.
Yeah.
So literally it makes sense for a nice brief recap.
Yeah, it's a transition, but it's so boring.
Book 4, you just got done with the Riddle House, which is enticing, and you want to know more, and you want to get into it more, and then you're just set back. You just take a big step backwards. It's unfortunate. Anyway, be on the lookout for Zach at Belated Binge Podcast. He does great work over there. I might be a guest on that podcast coming up sometime soon.
Fun.
They are finishing up Book 2, Chamber of Secrets.
Okay.
He's finishing that up over there. And then he'll start Prisoner of Azkaban soon.
That's exciting.
Hopefully I'll be on fairly soon.
I
think we're shooting for November, so let's hope.
These cross podcast things, these are fun.
Yeah, they're cool. So Zach does cool stuff at Belated Binge, so check him out over there. And then the third poll that he put up, which is still technically active at the time of recording. So these are the most up-to-date results that we have. But the question is, this is a very Elizabeth question.
It is though.
Are you annoyed that the movies did not put Harry's scar in the center of his forehead? So if you listen to the podcast in chapter 2, The Scar, the picture of him at the beginning of the chapter, the illustration, has the scar right in the center of his forehead. Elizabeth's made this whole big spiel.
I swear at some point in the book they specify that it's in the middle. I just don't understand why they wouldn't take that little extra effort to stick it in the middle.
I get it. I also don't care. So
is that what you voted for?
So the possible answers were yes, it's not that hard to put it in the center of the forehead. No, I barely even noticed. And 3, I noticed, but I don't care.
I think right now I'm the only person who cares.
The results would bear that out. At the time of this recording, yes, it's not that hard. It got 10% of the no, I barely even noticed, got 50% of the vote. And I noticed but don't care got 40% of the vote.
That's where you were?
I was in no, I didn't even really notice that they'd made a change. That wasn't a big detail that jumped out to me, so that was just me. But yeah.
All right,
but
I'm
also
just
I don't
picky.
care. So,
I'll accept it.
Fair enough. Please keep an eye over at our Twitter for all of the polls that Elizabeth puts on there, or me. I do post on our Twitter from time to time. Sometimes I'll throw out a poll. So keep an eye out on our Twitter at HogwartsAPod. Also, head over to our Instagram. We do put some polls up on Instagram from time to time on the story, and Anna and I post some pretty cool stuff on there as well. So check us out at HogwartsAPod. Oh yeah, there's a chapter to do. Chapter
but you know
3.
what? Once again, it's like, how much of a chapter is this really?
At least, I think there's only one paragraph in this entire chapter that dips into kind of like a recap. We don't really need it. Mm-hmm. But the rest of it, at least, is new information, if not boring information. But anyway.
To be fair, we're still at the Dursleys, that's why.
The chapter is chapter 3. It's the invitation. And just to give a brief rundown of what happens in the chapter, it takes place in the Dursley house, the entirety of it. And we get brought into what a breakfast at the Dursleys is like now, this summer. There's Harry reports on some letters that have come home from Dudley's school that have not been very kind.
Oh, they're fun letters. We can get into them after your recap. But...
Essentially, spoiler alert, Harry is ignoring everything about the diet, which we can also get into. Mm-hmm. And then the invitation comes in the post, and Vernon's not terribly thrilled for a couple of different reasons, but we'll get there too. The invitation is essentially the Weasleys inviting Harry to the Quidditch World Cup because Arthur has scored some cool tickets, and which is a payoff, actually, from the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, when they mentioned that the Quidditch World Cup is coming.
Right.
So this is kind of a payoff of that mention.
Months later, here's a Quidditch World Cup. Time still goes by.
Yeah, well, I mean, we end in, early June, and we arrive in July. So it's like a month of time has passed. Yeah. But anyway, that's essentially the chapter in a nutshell.
Then Harry is able to convince Uncle Vernon that, he should be able to go.
Yeah, so which he was going to do because, plot.
Could you imagine the book's just like, no, and then it's 6 more chapters of just home at the Dursley.
Right, that's what I'm saying. This book is like 700 something pages, people. She needs something to write about.
Maybe she did that first, and then the editor was like, let's cut these and these and these.
Can we do something different here? Anyway. So we started out with Dudley's school report, which essentially, summarizing, is he's a bully. Mm-hmm. He's not doing well academically. Mm-hmm. And for all intents and purposes, he's fat.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I have to give props to this educator, like the administration that wrote up these reports, because I mean, parents, speaking as a teacher, parents will hear what they want to hear, and they have very firm opinions about their children. So, I mean, like Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia both were like, oh, he's just gifted. The teachers don't understand him. Or I don't care if he's a bully. He wouldn't hurt a fly. And Uncle Vernon's just like, well, I don't want some little Nancy boy, like an intelligent child, apparently. Doesn't want that as a son. But they worded the weight comment so interesting, saying how, like, there's the fact remains, there are no more school uniforms that will fit your child. Something is wrong. Something needs to change. And I mean, we both put down in our comments, there's the line that says Dudley had reached roughly the size and weight of a young killer whale.
To be fair, that's Harry's commentary.
True.
That's Harry's self in his head commentary.
Right, which just because I looked it up on Google. Newborn killer whales are apparently between 265 and 353 pounds and are about 8.5 feet long. So if Dudley really, really were this size, he'd be an incredible 14-year-old child.
It's a big boy. That's a big boy.
But yeah, I just thought it was interesting. Like, really, they were able to word it so well that neither Vernon or Petunia could really brush it aside. It's like, something has to change.
I have 2 points on this. Mm-hmm. One, I get as an administration, you want to alert the parents to, hey, he's being a bully here. We can't allow that. That has to change.
Right.
That's a necessary, common remark to get in that circumstance.
Right.
The poor marks thing, also a pretty common thing for a teacher administrator to send home, being like, hey, he's struggling here. He's not doing as well. We need maybe some parent involvement. So those are 2 things that you would expect for a school administration in some form or fashion to comment on.
Right.
The overweight thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing.
I understand that it's a private school, mm-hmm. But here's the thing, and maybe his description, maybe Harry's not too far off on his description, because what you just illustrated is substantial. That's an abnormal size. Mm-hmm. But there is no way that you can't, like, especially at a private school, tailor something or have an outfit that can fit him. Because they reference that he can't fit in the clothes that are provided to him at the school.
Right.
It's still an odd thing to put in a report. I think it's still a little weird.
Well, what it did spark in my brain, like, it's an odd thing in general to write home to a parent and be like, hey, your child is vastly overweight. Because, I mean, in some levels, it's like, maybe the kid is just genetics and they can't necessarily help it. But at the same time, I mean, you could potentially be looking into this as some type of, like, child abuse aspect, like, you know what I mean? Like maybe the parents that's just, they are purposely mistreating the child with what they feed the child or whatever the case may be. It's an odd thing, And it also kind of reminded me of, like, well, okay, if there's a situation where a kid has really, really bad body odor, like, maybe it's because the family can't afford soap and shampoo and, laundry detergent and clean clothes, that kind of stuff. So if you're reaching out in that sense, well, maybe, the school district can provide that kind of stuff. Like, there are many school districts that have, donation type rooms with that kind of materials available to them. So I was thinking of it as almost like, well, are they reaching out to be like, hey, your eating habits aren't great for your son. Here are some suggestions of how to fix it. But in general, compared to the bullying and to the the grades aspect. It is a interesting thing to include on an end of the year school report.
Not to bring up another podcast, but I recently did a guest spot on the restricted section.
Right.
And which is a great podcast. Shout out to Christina over there at the restricted section. But we did briefly talk about, I can't remember if it made the final cut or not, but we did discuss that they are not they, JK specifically, is not very kind when it comes to describing overweight individuals.
Yeah, it comes across as like fat phobic.
A little bit.
Yeah.
She uses very aggressive, teasing, stereotypical type of verbiage when describing Dudley or other characters. And it kind of came through. Here, even though it's through Harry's eyes, the size and weight of a young killer whale comment.
Right.
Things like that. I'm like, when you're reading it the first time as a kid, you might not get it. You might think it's funny. Like, haha, that was a funny joke. And then you read it more as an adult and you're like, there's a lot of disparaging comments. Like, I think the conversation that we had specifically was in reference to maybe Aunt Marge with sausage-like fingers or like things like that, where it's like clearly an unflattering description of an overweight person.
Which on the one hand, like, yes, paints the picture in your brain. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, was that really necessary? We understand that she's overweight.
Yeah, and I mean, there is probably a fine line between descriptive language and getting that image in your head and more of a making fun of that body image.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think of it from, like, I mean, it's not Dudley's fault that he's this overweight. It's a
little Dudley's fault.
Okay, well, okay.
It's a little Dudley's fault.
I'll take that back. It's a little Dudley's fault because he can't handle, like, being around sweets and all that, like, fatty foods and stuff.
Zero self-control.
But at the same time, he's 14 years old and he's a teenage boy, and his parents have always given him as much as he wants and the richer type food that would put on the poundage. So he hasn't been taught good eating habits. He hasn't been taught good, like, exercising habits, and that's what his body has become as a result.
Yeah, so they get to the diet that he's specifically on, and that the whole family goes on, because he can't be the only one, which is fair. That's fair.
Which is fair, but just imagine Uncle Vernon. Like, he has to be like, can these kids go back to school so I can eat food?
You know he's cheating on the diet. As soon as he goes to work, he's picking up donuts and coffee on the way.
100%.
100%. But no, as far as the diet goes, I'm not super thrilled with the diet that they lay out here. They get a quarter of a grapefruit.
Yeah.
Which, if we're getting down to the nutrition of it, on one hand, anything for breakfast technically is a good thing as long as you have it, because it kickstarts metabolism and gets the metabolism burning calories. Understandable. That being said, though, a quarter of a grapefruit that's a little harsh to take.
It's going from the extreme of shove as much as you want into your mouth to very, very little.
Like maybe, some granola, like a granola bar and a grapefruit would be a good kickstart to your day. Just something else with a little extra nutritional value other than just the vitamin C. But anyway, Dudley's not going to get scurvy. Good for him. So it's not a stellar diet. But that being said, what Harry does is not good either. When he's like, forget this healthy food, I'm going to binge on cake and treats and chocolates, and at least Hermione gave him non-sugar
snacks. Yeah. I mean, Mrs. Weasley sent a fruit pie and assorted meat pies.
Well, thank goodness for Mrs. Weasley actually sending him something that resembles a meal.
Some real food.
Yeah, some actual food.
To be fair, though, I mean, his quarter of the grapefruit was going to be the smallest of them all. I mentioned every meal was going to be the least amount of food possible, and Harry's not obese. He's this skinny little 14-year-old teenager boy.
Well, the line
food.
Was that as long as Harry got the least, Dudley would be somewhat more willing to go along with the diet.
Right. Which it speaks volumes about how they're training Dudley, right? Like, yes, you're on a diet and your cousin's on the diet, but as long as you have a little bit more food, you are superior. Like, okay, great teaching, great parenting.
Also,
Sarcasm.
I have a question about Harry here. He's hoarding all of these snacks that he wrote to all of his friends about, like, please send me actual food.
Yeah.
And he gets all of his food back, and he hides it under a floorboard. And I get some of the sugar-free snacks, and I get
in packaging,
but the meat pies and stuff that Mrs. Weasley's sending, all of the cakes, you're shoving those under a floorboard.
I
That
kind of
can't
imagine they
keep
came in like some kind of like basket or container,
a magically sealed container
Maybe.
that would refrigerate this stuff. Because I can't imagine. Like
I thought there could be a lot of space under your floor.
Putting one cake under a floorboard is one thing. He got like 3 here.
I'm wondering how big of a cake it was, though. You know, like,
Even a little individual one that you would get at like a local grocery store is still a substantial thing.
I mean, unless it's like a cupcake size, but I can't imagine Mrs. Weasley restricting herself to only sending a single cupcake.
No, absolutely not. But anyway, I was just kind of the whole diet thing both ways with Dudley and with Harry just seemed ridiculous. Anyway.
But that's the Dursleys. They're ridiculous.
Fair enough. We might hear more about the Dursleys in our spoiler section. We'll see. Anyway, so we get to the actual point of this whole chapter, which is the invitation itself.
Right.
And I give Mrs. Weasley a lot of credit for writing this thing very, very well.
Oh, yeah. The way she words everything.
She words it very
respectful.
well as she probably could have. The mistake she makes is putting about 8,000 stamps on a regular letter.
Well, that and referencing magical things. You know, like Quidditch and
I give her a pass on that because she only does it like twice. Quidditch and
Department of Magical Games and Sports.
Yeah,
and,
that.
And Muggle Postman.
Okay, 3 times. So I give her a pass because other than the Muggle Postman bit, pretty much everything else is fairly important information.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. She gave a good effort, much better than Ron would have. So, or Arthur, for that matter. But I digress. Anyway, no, she does a good job with the letter. But Vernon is turned off immediately because the postman makes a joke out of how many stamps are on it and was like, where did this come from?
Right.
Who sent this? Which made Vernon very, very defensive very quickly.
It also makes me wonder so many things about the behind the scenes of this envelope. Because, like, did they have stamps? Like, did Arthur buy stamps at some point and was just like, this is part of my collection? Which I could totally see because, it's a fun thing.
So then was he upset when Mrs. Weasley clearly used his collection?
I fully bet you that Arthur put the stamps on the envelope. I think he had a blast putting them on the envelope and that, made him go overboard. But I could also wonder, did they go to a Muggle post office and, asked to buy some stamps and then just got very excited because that's what the Muggles do. So we're going to be like the Muggles,
I think Mrs. Weasley put the stamps on, but I totally love the image of Arthur being like, no, Molly, let me put these on. Let me put all these on here. This is how you send a letter. This is his element.
The only thing that makes me think maybe it was Arthur's. I do hope we've put enough stamps on. The we've pronoun makes me think it's her and Arthur together.
Probably.
Writing this letter. She was like, I'll do the writing. You can put the stamps on the envelope.
I think she consulted his Muggle knowledge background for sure.
It just cracks me up, though.
But yeah, Vernon was clearly off-put from the get-go, and nothing in the letter really did anything to dissuade that. So
I wonder if they probably could have just been like, hey, no mention of Quidditch. All we want to do is just take Harry off your hands for the rest of the summer. And that easily would have worked. But just because Molly is a decent person who, will explain why she wants to take your nephew away for the summer, that's why she included the Quidditch.
As much as they know about Harry and Harry's life, they clearly don't know enough about it.
No one knows the Dursleys.
They don't know the details enough, and you can tell that because Mrs. Weasley is cautious and hesitant about or not cautious or hesitant. She goes, oh, I'm sure he's told you about us,
right?
Or things like that in the letter, and I'm just sitting reading this letter she has no idea about what this dynamic is like.
Right.
Which is not necessarily her fault.
No,
she herself has not spent a ton of time.
It's shocking to everybody when they see it. Why would you expect the famous Harry Potter, who is such a nice young boy, to be loathed.
Did you
by
realize
him.
he was magical and special? I didn't until the last chapter. It's
Well, maybe
amazing.
that's what they included in the last chapter.
Who knew? I didn't know. Anyway. Being salty over here. Anyway. No, but Ron has spent a lot of time. The boys and Ginny has spent a lot of time. But Molly hasn't spent a ton of time with Harry, really.
Right.
So,
And
but yeah.
no matter how you describe the Dursleys, there's no painting of accurate picture.
Yeah, you got to experience it for yourself.
Yeah.
So the Quidditch World Cup is coming, and it's Ireland versus Bulgaria, which is just a cool matchup, and I'm a nerd, so I love it. Go Ireland. Go Irish. Nothing against Bulgaria, but go Irish.
Well, I like Uncle Vernon as they're reading the letter, just being like, Harry has to explain these wizarding terms to him, like, Quidditch. What's this rubbish? What's Quidditch? And he's just like, oh, it's a sport played on a broomstick, and that broomstick aspect makes me laugh that throws him off into a panic because it's a somewhat magical related word, even though it's a broomstick. Like, Muggles have those too.
When I was reading this, the thought crossed my mind, it's like, broomstick is so stereotypically tied with, like, magic and witches. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, it just hit me as such, like, a trope, I guess, of just like, yeah, of course their magical way of transportation would be brooms. Of course it would. I don't know why it just hit me, like, right then as I was reading, but yeah.
He doesn't even say, like, a flying broom, though. It's just a sport played on a broom, like...
If they weren't flying, they'd be even more ridiculous. Nothing against quad ball in real life. But it's just not the same without it flying. I'm sorry. Anywho. They also drop news that Percy is working at the Department of International Magical Cooperation, which if I were to work for the Ministry and not be an Auror like I would have dreamed of being...
You would rock at this job.
This would probably be the job that I would go into, yes.
You would have so much fun traveling.
Yeah, and then what does Ron put in his little PS letter? Like, don't mention anything abroad or else you'll, like, never hear the end of it.
Bored to death.
And I'm like, rude.
To be fair, though, I mean, like, it's Percy. Percy, the way he describes anything will make it sound very, very dry. If you worked at that job and you were to explain it, I feel like it'd be much more interesting.
Yes, I am not Percy.
We also met a new pet. We have Pig.
Yes, we met him at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban as he dropped Sirius's letter off. Mm-hmm. Hedwig, not a fan?
Oh, well, that's because it's a little, tiny little fluff ball that's very hyperactive.
Hedwig views this new owl as undignified.
Yes.
Like, do your job. It's a profession. What are you doing? Which I kind of like from Hedwig, but she is a sassy owl.
I like the idea of it being a profession because it's not like they get paid, but at the same time, it's like the honor of carrying wizard mail. But Pig is just so excited. It's the first letter he's ever delivered.
Successfully.
Other than Sirius's. It's Ron's, so he's very, very happy. Harry's just like, calm down.
Oh, it hit him in the head like a golf or a tennis ball is what he said.
It's hilarious to me.
So as much as this was kind of a nothing's really happening chapter, there was at least things to talk about and things going on. And
I guess we could also mention like the real thing that was able to convince Vernon that yes, he should go was mentioning the fact that he was writing a letter to Sirius. Because Vernon, now was under the impression that Sirius is still a mass murderer. And he knows he's his godfather. So the internal debate of, well, I could get rid of Harry 2 weeks early and that'd be fantastic. Ooh, but it's going to make Harry happy. Like, that was very, very quickly settled by the fact that, like, his mass murderer godfather could come kill us if we don't let him go. So, fine, you be happy. Go to this stupid Quidditch.
You know what I'm surprised? Is with Vernon and Petunia's just hesitancy towards anything being odd. Like, this letter being delivered to them was an affront to them. Like, it was a personal insult to them.
Right.
Yet Vernon requests that they come pick him up. Not that he would drive and, like, meet them somewhere. If I was Vernon, I'd be like, fine, we'll go to King's Cross and I'll drop you off, like, in London or whatever. Mm-hmm. I get him not wanting to drive out to who knows where in this weird community of wizards, witches and wizards, that's fine. But the idea of him literally, and maybe he didn't think this through, clearly he didn't, but having them come to him, I think was like, Vernon, are you even sure what you're saying? Okay, we're just going to let that go, and I'm just going to go back to my room and eat a cake.
I think it's also the aspect that, like, I think they said it in Sorcerer's Stone, how Vernon is never the happiest as he is when he's criticizing Harry and, like, complaining about Harry and just everything about Harry.
That conflict now is in place.
Yeah, but I think it's just, like, the fun of, like, well, you know, I'm not going to inconvenience myself to drop you off wherever, but I'm going to complain like you won't believe when these wizards come to pick you up. But I could totally see your point of, like, if you want to avoid the abnormal, don't have wizards
meet somewhere in the middle and drop them off.
Yeah, like, you won't want your neighbors to see these people supposedly, like, drive up to your house and who knows what they look like.
I do like this mentality that Vernon's struggling with of, like, I love to make Harry miserable, and not going to this thing would make him miserable. But him going to this thing gets him out of my hair for 2 weeks, 2 weeks earlier. What do I do here?
What's more important to me? Harry's misery or my misery?
So, yeah, it was a very interesting insight to Vernon's mind there. But so there was some stuff in this chapter to kind of pick and peruse through.
Yeah, it's just still really short and just like, you know, like I said, the Monty Python. Get on with it! I want to get to the Quidditch match. Go to the Weasleys. Go get out of the Dursley's house.
I'm sure many that are listening to this podcast are like wanting us to get to the spoilers, and they're like, get on with it! Go to the spoilers.
Maybe that should be our next break sound.
Spoiler alert for the spoiler section. There's not a whole lot that we really have for that. No. So as much as this non-spoiler section has been pretty much our usual length, give or take, the spoiler section will be much shorter. So just be prepped for that. We will pause it right here. I will not kill the spare, and we will get into the spoiler section.
Kill the spare!
All right, we are back with the spoiler section of Chapter 3, The Invitation.
The spare is still here.
Yes, she is. But anyway, what we wanted to get to in this spoiler section, this is a thin chapter, obviously, as far as spoilers go. Nothing to really pop out. What we kind of wanted to expound on at this point was this chapter featured Dudley pretty heavily for the first half of it, at least.
And it's the first time that Dudley's, like, you know, not having the best of times.
He's not in control for the first time in a while.
Yeah.
He's getting things forced upon him.
And he does not like that.
No, and they're still bargaining, and they're still trying to find ways to make him a little bit more comfortable with all of it. And it's sort of working.
Do you think they recognize how much damage they've done to Dudley as a child? Because, I mean, like, if you're a parent, right, at some point, if you really, truly see your child and recognize, like, my kid is a bully, my kid is failing in school, my kid is this overweight, and I have to beg them to do anything, I have to bribe them to do anything. Like, I mean, I'm not a parent, but at some point, don't you think, like, you'd look at your own parenting and be like, where'd I go wrong?
I think their biggest issue is not necessarily spoiling him, which is an issue, but I don't think it's the biggest one. I think their biggest one is overlooking and excusing some potential caution or just straight up red flags in his character, and ignoring kind of what others are seeing. Like, it takes the term, like, rose-colored glasses to a whole new level, these two.
It very much, though, reminds me of what I see these days with parents and with kids.
Sure.
Like, I mean, I know you work in a high school, too, and you see the entitlement with your athletes. But there, with education, I mean, I've been a teacher. This is my 11th year. And that's not a very, very long time. But even with that short amount of time, I can tell kids are not the same as they were 10 years ago. There's a lot of apathy and entitlement, and, you know, like, if I don't want to do something, I'm just not going to do it. Which, when we were in high school, like, that, you did your stuff, right? You didn't just, like, be like, I don't want to do today, and then just sit on your phone, because, of course, phones weren't as much of a thing. But it's it's interesting because I mean we look at that and it's like, clearly you learned this from somewhere, and there's all sorts of theories of how the pandemic affected that, and how parents who work multiple jobs and aren't able to be at home as much and parent their kids as much, like that's a factor into why the behavior is the way that it is. And I don't just like social media, the rise of that, and how that, teachers and education in general, like you're constantly having to battle the phone in order to get attention and convince kids that they should care about things. But I mean, Dudley's behavior is right on track with the real world these days, unfortunately.
I think some of his outbursts are trying to get that same attention that he gets at home. And the only way he can seemingly do it is by being that bully and, using the one thing that he can control, which is his size. I mean, he knows that's one thing in his corner that makes him, I guess, special, if you want to call it that. The one thing that makes him kind of set apart is his size, so he uses that to his advantage. He surrounds himself with enablers, even at school, away.
Do you think anyone at school, bullies him for his size?
I don't know enough about the dynamic at...
Smeltings?
No, because I don't know, how many years are there. I don't know if there are a lot of older kids that... In his year, no, probably not, because he's literally the big man on campus.
Yeah.
So no, probably not in his year, but... Also, he surrounds himself with an entourage that can shield him from a lot of that.
And I guess, too, he carries the persona of being a bully, because that's his personality with Harry for his entire life.
It's almost how he self-identifies.
Yeah.
Which
is a shame.
It is. And some of that is Vernon and Petunia, but, you mentioned something in the non-spoiler about it's a lot of Vernon and Petunia, which it so much is. But let's not take Dudley completely off of the hook here. His self-control is a problem.
Right.
He does take enjoyment with the bully aspect. It's not like he's shying away from it. He's leaning into it. He does take some enjoyment in making Harry's life a little bit worse to make his life better. It's a little bit is on Dudley too here.
What's interesting to me, and this thought just popped in my brain, we know Lily was the witch of the family, and Petunia was very jealous, right? And it was because her parents were impressed by this, because, magic, it exists. This is super cool. I'm really excited about it. Dudley is kind of in the Petunia's shoes, only he doesn't have the same reaction as her, simply because, his parents' attitude towards it is so... this is bad. You don't want this. But I feel like if their attitude wasn't there, Dudley would be all over magic. I can, Harry, use your wand and get the remote control for the TV, have it float across the room, or get me a soda from the fridge, or anything cool.
But you could say that too about, Petunia is not a child anymore.
Right.
She's an adult woman who has lost her sister.
Right.
To a tragic event.
Right. Which she blames on magic.
Sure, which is fine. But you're still an adult woman that has, in theory, put aside some of the childish... you lost your sister. At some point, some things just become so trivial. I was always jealous of her magical... Well, she's gone now.
Right.
You lost...
Family.
You
lost blood,
so why... put that aside at some point. Some stuff just is, so small after bigger things happen.
You know what this shows once again? Literally every character needs therapy.
Yeah. But what I'm getting to is her marrying Vernon. And Vernon's... And again, maybe, their wants and needs kind of matched. She wanted to put the magic behind her. So going to Vernon, who's your quote-unquote most normal person ever... helped some of that. So it's partly her own fault. But I think Vernon also creates a presence in the house where it doubles and triples down on the, no, we're not doing any of this weird stuff.
I was reading a little bit of the Harry Potter wiki for this, and it was talking about how Petunia and Vernon met and became engaged and stuff. And apparently every one of their dates were so mundane, and Vernon just talked about himself and just never asked Petunia any questions about herself, which she loved because she was like, I don't want to talk about my sister and magic and the traumatizing things at home. And eventually she broke down crying to him at one date and was like, my sister is a weirdo and don't judge me for that. So her big fear was like, I'm going to be associated with, Lily's abnormality and then you'll reject me. And he was just kind of like, well, I guess that sucks, but that's not you. And
everybody has weird people in their family.
Right, and that's what made her just be like, fall in love. And apparently they got engaged in the most normal way in their family's living room. And it was just like the most boring possible thing you can find, which is what she wanted. She didn't want magic.
So let's just say she never meets Vernon. Mm-hmm. Like, she's either single or met someone else who's not the most boring, normal dude in the world. Anybody else. Mm-hmm. Does she still treat Harry with the same level of disdain that she does?
That's a good question.
I would say no. I would say Vernon does.
Vernon amplifies it.
Vernon amplifies. Amplifies is a good word.
Yeah. I don't know. There might be some still like animosity towards Harry, but I feel like if her husband is like, oh, that's interesting, it's not necessarily something to be mad at. Maybe her attitude would change.
Do you think her resentment towards everything her sister embodied and what this child would embody would outweigh the idea of this is the only thing left for my sister? Or which do you think would win? If again, this is her being single or with a different person, not Vernon.
I don't know. I feel like her attitude towards magic is so much just, she was jealous. She wanted to be the magical one. She wanted the attention. And that's why she wrote to Dumbledore and was like, can I come too? And because that couldn't happen and Lily's getting all the attention, I think that's just...
Jealousy's not hatred, though, right?
Jealousy grew into hatred. And I think that's just because Lily died and they were never ever able to, really talk through the issue that they had.
I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I would take a guess at that jealousy that grew into hatred was just an avenue of her to put up a barrier between dealing with all of that emotion.
Yeah, probably.
This was just an easier way of doing it than actually coming to grips with, oh my gosh, my sister, who I did love at one point, if not forever. We don't know exactly all of Petunia's motivations at this point, especially. But honestly, we don't even get a whole lot of Petunia throughout the entire series, really.
Just little tidbits.
Little tidbits, especially there's one big scene coming up way down the road. But so we don't, and maybe we'll do a Petunia character deep dive like we've done some other characters.
No, with what you're saying, I think it is. Vernon amplified it and helped her build the wall that therapy would have helped her break down.
Yeah.
And it just didn't go that way. You brought up something that made me have a what if for you. Okay. What if Petunia had found a wizard husband? Do you think her attitude would change in that way?
I think in the terms of this book and how this book series, the Harry Potter series, is written, yes, because love does tend to conquer some other challenges, let's say, which is completely contradictory towards the person who wrote these books, which is mind-blowing, but anyway, whatever. That aside, yeah, the way these books are written, yes. There's a couple of examples, some we've already told about with deep dives, some we'll get to later with new characters that we meet, other things like that. Love seems to conquer all in this series, so yes, it would probably change her mindset on the whole thing. It would still stink because she doesn't have the magical ability that her husband and prospective son or daughter would have.
Maybe she marries a wizarding man, and then they have a child, Dudley, who is not magical, and then they have Harry, who's magical, and then it's just like one big blended family.
What?
Somewhere in the universe, and in the multiverse.
Not to cut this discussion short, but I want to wrap up the podcast on this thought. In that scenario that you just mentioned, the Petunia marrying a wizard instead of Vernon, it made me think of the WandaVision episode with Wanda and Vision as magicians, and Vision was the flourish, like, lead magician, with Wanda doing all the actual magic in the background.
Yeah.
They could have clearly set up a business like that.
That
Petunia could have been the
so
magician,
good.
and the husband could have been like the help and doing all the actual magic. And they could have made a killing on that.
See, if only they knew about using magic to their advantage. That could be a thing.
Oh, for sure. But, the Dursleys aren't exactly the most opportunistic entrepreneurs in the world.
No. The only other thing I did want to poke at before we totally finish up the spoilers.
You mean I can't end on my WandaVision flourish?
Sorry. You can say flourish again at the end. Will that make you happy?
Maybe.
The only other thing was with Dudley. Like, this, I feel like this is the beginning of Dudley's life starting to change. Like, I mean, up to this point, it's been, I get whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. I can bully Harry as much as I want, which I will do a lot. But now it's like, okay, my life is suddenly unpleasant. This is weird. I'm home, and I can't eat food, and I can't do what I want, and hence all the temper tantrums. But next book, In Order of the Phoenix, that is where Dudley Dursley, he's put on the path of changing as a character. His whole being attacked by the Dementors, which, I mean, even Harry kind of marvels at. He's like, he has the best life ever. He's so spoiled. Everything's perfect for him. What could he possibly have to feel upset about, And in what I was looking about at the Dursleys on the Harry Wiki, they were talking about how J.K. Rowling said Dudley in that attack sees himself for his true self, and that freaks him out. And that's what pushes him towards the change that he recognizes he needs to take. Which I just find it interesting, like, from writer's perspective. I mean, Dudley, like you've already said, he's not a very rounded character. He's fairly flat. We see him every summer, and you see all the Dursleys every summer, and that's about it. But even with just those little scenes, you still have some development going on, and that's an impressive thing to do.
We clearly do not get the end of the Dursleys here. We see...
Much as Harry wishes we did.
We see Vernon, but that opinion does change at some point. So there's more story to tell on Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley. Mm-hmm. And there's more to kind of deep dive into, and we will deep dive into Petunia and Dudley at some point. We'll see if we get to Vernon. But we will deep dive into at least those two at some point down the road here. But with that, we'll wrap up the podcast for this week. Thank you guys for listening, and let us know what you think on everything we just talked about on Chapter 3, The Invitation. And we'll see you next week for Chapter 4.
Bye, everyone.
Flourish. Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hogwarts a Pod.